Good morning and welcome to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. I am Bhoe, your host, and I'm glad that you're on board today. We are on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and U97.5 FM, Hot Like Pepper Radio, Multicultural Radio. We continue our independence theme today. Tomorrow is Independence. I want to wish you a happy independence, every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. Things might be tough, but this is our country, and we must focus on what we can do to help to build it, secure it, and retrieve the future and the present from this very difficult time that we are going through. Today, I have a pre-recorded interview which I did on Friday with novelist, playwright, and short story writer Earl Lovelace, one of our great writers in Trinidad and Tobago. And without much ado, I want to invite you to look at that video, which really is an interview that I did with him on Friday. Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. And my guest this morning is Mr. Earl Lovelace. He is a novelist, and he has written several novels, and we will talk maybe about one or two. But he is also a short story writer, and he is also a playwright. And he has also worked to transform some of his writing into film, and would like to do that indeed for others. Okay? Earl Lovelace is a very, very Trinidadian writer, but he's a West Indian writer, and more than that, he is a writer of world stature. He's a very, very gifted writer, very gifted novelist, very sensitive to nuances in the society, and we want to talk with him today. Could we invite Earl Lovelace, please, to engage us? Earl, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I am quite well, thank you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be our guest this morning. This week, what we've been doing is that we've been exploring with people in the society, thoughtful people. We've been exploring what independence means. We could reflect on independence a little bit. We could look at our current situation and make an assessment. And we also want to look to the future, what might we hope for? What might we expect? And all of this has been kind of turned topsy-turvy by this COVID pandemic. So we hope to engage you, and we will engage you on those issues, but we also want to talk about your writing, because it's not every day that you get a writer to engage you for half an hour on television and to share that with the population out of which he came, and for whom, at least partially, he writes. So we are going to ask you some things about your work, your books, what you are doing, and stuff like that. So if that is okay, we'll start this basically in a discussion around independence. Okay? Earl, let me start. You were going to say something?
No, I'm fine.
Hello?
Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm hearing you as well.
Okay. Let me start by asking you this general question. A writer, in a sense, never stops thinking. He or she never stops absorbing or creating. What are you writing right now?
Okay. I am writing a number of things at the same time. I'm dealing with an autobiography, which I have partly written. I'm also dealing with a set of talks, which I have also partly written. And I'm also dealing with a novel, which I'm engaged in writing at the moment. So I have my plate full, so to speak.
Oh gosh, well, it's so wonderful that you would take a little time to talk with us. But tell me something, that in itself raises a question. Is that how you work? That you can work on several things at once? And how is that for you? Why do you work like that?
Right. Well, I have not always worked like that, but I suppose this is how things turn out, as it were. You know.
Yes. Yeah, well, I work, the reason I ask is because I work a lot like that. Because I many times I'm doing 4 or 5 things at once, and one helps me to feed off the other in clarifying my thoughts and bringing it to bear. So I thought it might work like that for you. Do you find that it is working like that for you?
Well, I think that certain things I have worked on almost solely, you know, and I have put them down until I'm ready to finish them.
Right.
So things are kind of unfinished things, you know?
Yeah, well, yeah, well, you know, life is a series of unfinished business and unfinished conversations. So you are a living example of trying to bring that to fruit.
Right.
So now, when you write, though, I mean, you're writing your autobiography now, you delve in your memory, but what does that really involve for you when you delve in your memory like that?
Well, I have written this some time ago before my memory gets impaired.
Yes, well, I hope not. You seem alert to me.
So I have actually written this and I've left it there. I'll be dealing with it soon.
Yes, okay. This process of delving in your memory, how does it work for you? So you've done the autobiography, you have some version of it, and you're looking at it now. So you have the benefit of having done this from memory, but you have hindsight, and you are looking at it. How does that work for you?
Well, I think that right at the moment, it is important because I find myself now reviewing ideas,
Yes.
both presented in the society overall and even some that I myself have presented. I think that the review of ideas is very, very important for a place and for a person in order for you to understand what really has transpired and how well have you grown, as it were.
Okay.
Right?
When you reflect on Trinidad and Tobago as a nation over 59 years, and you look at your own evolution as a writer, you reflect on it. You were born in Toco, you grew up in Tobago, you work with the Ministry of Agriculture. What is the connection between your wanting to be a writer, becoming a writer, writing your stuff, and the evolution of this society that is Trinidad and Tobago, independent Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I think that there's the sense in which I can trace my childhood and what happened, what has taken place to the present. Well, let me see if I can say that in a more sensible way. I read a lot as a child, and I read about the slave. And I think from that moment, but I knew my grandparents, who were black people, who were right there, who I grew up with actually, and who I could not see being the slave. I didn't really, couldn't visualize my grandfather as being a slave. So I think that the question of this business about being slaves occupied me from at the age of younger than 10, around 10, let's say, right?
Okay.
And I have been with that idea of how to reclaim yourself from that idea of an imposed idea of slave on you, as if slave were a vocation. So, you know, when they talk about people who are, these were the slaves did this, it sounds like if a category of human beings. And I wanted to show from very early, I suppose to myself firstly, but eventually to the society, that people were enslaved rather than slaves, and that there was the whole business about resisting and overcoming enslavement. I'm thinking about the business of so presenting people as enslaved, if you want,
Yes.
and having a struggle against enslavement as being the real position from which we start. So whereas we said we started with people who were slaves, we have to start with people who were enslaved. And
Yeah.
what we do about that.
Yes, I remember having a conversation many years ago with you in which that was a very important point for you. And you stressed this issue of enslavement versus being a slave or slavery. And it was very important to you as an intellectual concept, but also as an emotional concept. And I remember that very well, and it has stayed with you, I know that. And you said just now something very interesting. You lived with your grandparents in Tobago, and you could not conceive of them as slaves. What does that mean? How does the person who is listening or watching understand what you mean by that?
Right. Well, my grandfather was a Methodist, and he was in the church, and he was the person who took up collection. So apparently he was on the church board, and there was a minister, I can't remember his name, it just slipped me right this minute, but there was a minister who, a white man, who was the head of the church. And my grandfather would always say, and I said to Reverend Harrison is the man's name, Reverend Harrison, so and so and so. And I could see him drawing himself up to present himself as equally person to Reverend Harrison. And I suppose it is in that sense I knew that he was contending with the idea out in the world, perhaps, that he was lesser than anybody.
Yes.
And I think that is the genesis of the idea.
Your grandparents were Tobagonians, born and bred?
Yes. My grandmother, however, was from Garifuna, from St. Vincent. Okay. But my grandfather was Tobago.
Okay. One of the things I've found with Tobagonians, for instance, is that I find that they have a stronger sense of self-confidence in themselves. I mean, they seem to be more comfortable with who they are. And I suspect that part of that has to do with the fact that they have a rural environment. And more than that, they were largely self-sufficient people, looking after their own land and growing crops and looking after animals and being self-sufficient in the sea, throwing a seine, these kinds of things. I don't know if you want to reflect on that a little bit.
Actually, well, that is exactly true because my grandfather was principally a gardener. I wouldn't call him a farmer because a farmer suggests big, a long, a lot of land. But there were about 2 or 4 acres of land on which he worked.
Yes.
And we had goats and everything. We were totally self-sufficient.
Yeah, you were
In
self-sufficient.
fact, the only thing we didn't have is bread on occasionally, right? So yes, I think that that is quite correct. That assessment of the Trinbagonian as being.
I think that is one of the distinguishing features, cultural distinguishing features between Tobago and Trinidad. That level of self-confidence and that peasant sense of ownership and proprietary, what can I say, existence on an island that is yours, and having a home and a place that is yours, and you take that as part of who you are. And I think that that was an important thing in the development of the consciousness of people in Tobago, and you can see it now in their confidence. I mean, I don't know how it is with young people now in Tobago because these things tend to change, but the older people are certainly like that.
Right.
So I want to ask you something. Would you say that your sensibility was nurtured by your experience of rural environments and communities? I mean, you grew up in Tobago, you were born in Toco, you spent some time in forestry, you were in the Ministry of Agriculture. You also spent some time in the Trinidad Guardian, so you had a kind of journalistic eye for things. How did these things help to make you and nurture the kind of sensibility that was yours when you sat down to write something for yourself?
Well, I feel that the whole thing was a whole process of discovery and discovering who you are. And it is not a finished process either.
Yes.
Right. What I'm saying that the whole, I've seen you. Right. Yes, the whole process was a process of discovery. Yes.
You are a novelist who has you've written 6 novels, but you also a short story writer, you are a playwright. I went to see Justina Calypso, I think when it was premiered at the University of the West Indies some years ago. And I know your books fairly well. What is the difference in the writing when you write a novel or when you try to write a short story? I know one of your short stories you've made into a film. And when you are writing your autobiography now, is there something different about the way you go about each one?
Well, I think the form is different, but I know that the question is something deeper than the question of form,
Yes.
because you have the form for play and the form for a novel and the form for short stories.
I'm trying to get you to talk about what it takes in terms of consciousness and what the creative process in each case demands of you.
Right.
Don't think of it intellectually.
Sorry?
Don't think of it intellectually, Earl. Think of it experientially. Because that is how you create,
What is the difference between writing a play, let's say, and writing a novel.
Yeah, yes, or doing a short
The form,
story. Yeah.
right. I would say that the form determines the writing of the play. If you're writing a novel, you can choose how to write it, as it were. A
Yes.
play has to be written with somebody speaking, and speaking, action, and as it were, stage directions, if you want.
Yes.
It's somewhat different, and yes, and an autobiography. Well, I think you could decide what you want to do. You know,
Yes.
I haven't given a great deal of thought to the difference. It just seems that one is more suited to a certain form than the other.
Okay.
For example, I was recently actually in writing this novel of mine. I had been writing it for a little while, and I felt, well, maybe I decided this material would do well in a play. And I tried to write it into a play, but it didn't quite work.
Yes.
So I understand what you're saying in those terms. So the form is determined how you will proceed, I suppose.
Yeah. I suppose when you're writing a play, you'd think about the stage and how the characters would be on a stage. But when you're writing a novel, in a fundamental way, you are seeing them turned into pages, but dancing and working and operating in your imagination, no? Or is it the same for both?
Well, as I say, it isn't something that I have given
Much
a
thought
whole
to.
lot of formal thought to.
Yeah, you've just
Sorry?
I said you've just created. The act of creation comes, I would say, for you in a kind of inspirational way when you sit down to write.
Right. And the question, I suppose, is why are you writing this? Why are you
Yes.
writing this in this way? Why are you writing this play? Or why are you writing this novel or this well, the autobiography speaks for itself. You're dealing with your own life, etc., and experience, and you're trying to make some sense of it. With a play, why are you writing it? What ideas do you want to present? And how well they are presented in this form as opposed to in another form.
Yeah. In 1965, when you had completed your book While Gods Are Falling, which received a prize here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I remember as a schoolboy in QRC reading about it, that's to say reading about the fact that you had gotten the BP prize. I didn't know who Earl Lovelace was, and I didn't know you for years after that. But I found it remarkable that somebody would write a book and put it forward for assessment, and they would win, at that time in my view, a big prize for something that they wrote. That was the beginning of yourself as a writer who was recognized as a writer. Tell me about the years just before that and what made you feel you had to write something.
At some point, I thought of myself, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Because I felt that despite the whatever difficulties there were in my own circumstances, that I could have done whatever I put my mind to doing. And I thought that one of the most important things, actually, was to write.
Okay.
So I began writing.
Why did you think that? Why did you think that to write was an important thing?
One, I think because it endures, one.
Okay. Very good.
And two, because I don't know how much of this particular aspect of it I thought. I thought, one, it endures, and two, that you can, I don't want to say that set forward ideas and make things deal with some of the ideas that were involved in the society. Actually, the truth is, I don't think I thought that. I think it was initially that one endured as a writer. Let us leave it at that. We might discover something else.
Okay, so, but that is a very important thought, Earl, and I think that it's a very sincere thought, that when you thought of doing something in your life, that you wanted to do something that would be enduring, and writing became the route that you took to create something that would endure in the society and in the world. Reflect on that a little bit. You've lived many years since 1965 and that first major act of creation. When you reflect on that business of doing something that would endure now, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking, first of all, yes, that these things will endure, and I still have the faith that they will endure, because time is a long time, and hopefully our own consciousness as a people, because I think that keeping these things alive, this is not your task anymore. Your task might be to write the book or to write the play or whatever, but the task of maintaining these things or keeping these things as important as touchstones for whatever we wanted to do, I think this is a responsibility, if you want, of the society. So I could only do what I want to do or wanted to do, and the society has to do the rest.
The rest.
Okay. Yeah.
No, that also is an important thought, because it raises the question of what is the responsibility of an individual in the society, and what is the responsibility of the society to itself. I know I'm asking you some hard questions, Earl, but they're only coming up because your creative mind is saying something. So could you speak to that a little bit? What is the responsibility of the individual in a society? And what is the responsibility of a society to itself?
Well, I think that the individual is to do best, or do the best that he can do or she can do, to uphold the ideas. Despite your circumstances, there are certain ideas that one can uphold, to uphold the ideas that advance life, So the individual is really helping to maintain life in the society. Those or to touch upon those aspects that we think important not in an enduring way.
Yeah.
Right? The society has to find out what is really good for its people, what is the best it can do for its people, and support that. And I think that is also quite a big task.
Yeah. But you think maybe trying to, I mean, simplify it a little bit. You think in a sense the individual has to find a sense of what it is, what do I stand for as a human being? What do I stand for as an individual? And the society also has to wrestle with that question. What do we as a society stand for? What are the things that are important in that? Do you think that that is the connection between the individual consciousness and the societal consciousness?
So I think so. I think at least, I think that is very much it. What do we stand for? And what do we encourage ourselves to stand for?
Right. Okay.
So,
that is good. Yeah, you know, Earl, I know you're wrestling with these ideas, but you realize that you've come up with about 3 very profound thoughts in the process of sort of wrestling and trying to discover how to answer some of the questions I'm asking. So this is going to be an important interview. I'm going to send it for you when we're through. One of the things in your books, I mean, so for instance, like in Dragon Can't Dance or Wine of Astonishment, and even in Salt to some extent, is this, sometimes you have this kind of contention or clash between rural culture on the one hand and urban culture on the other. Do you see this as an inevitable clash, this clash between rural sensibility and urban disposition?
Right. I should go back a little bit because one of the things that I didn't mention, but I also spent some time in Port of Spain.
Yes.
At a very important juncture between the ages of, let's say, 12 to 17. No, to 18.
Okay. What part of Port of Spain did you live?
Quarry Street.
Okay,
we
so
moved to a number of places.
Right. So it's
Spain
like East
more
Port
than
of Spain. East Port of Spain.
Right. And very important because, and I had some friends who, one who unfortunately had to talk about the aspiring middle class, as it were. And, right. I think that the importance of Port of Spain was it gave me a certain idea of Trinidad, but with a very incomplete idea. When I went to the countryside to work, I remember going to a wake, and at that wake I saw people dancing bongo, people singing, people beating bamboo, and I began to see, and the whole actual celebration of the wake, if you want.
Yes.
And I realized that here was the culture that was missing, if you want, from Port of Spain. It was also something that different people carried with them. The Port of Spain people carried perhaps modernity with them, but these rural folk carried with them a rootage in a past, in something that they could delight in, and yes, right? And be proud, and proud of wasn't even the word to use, but it's just simply that they were people who were aware of themselves and aware of a culture, although they wouldn't put it in those words.
You said that in the urban environment, that also meant a kind of modernization. But with the modernization came a stripping or a loss of the culture. But in the rural setting, the culture was very much present and vital and embedded in the consciousness of rural people. Is that a distinction that you began to see that affected your writing between urban and rural?
Right. I think I would say yes. But I think also how did that affect me was also quite important because...
All right. Good. Explore that.
Right. In Port of Spain, I remember being very concerned because this was the period of gang warfare.
Yes.
And people would be walking along the street and you would be concerned about gangs and their violence. At least I was also concerned about that. Okay. But when I went to work and the reason for that is I didn't know these people at all.
Yeah,
I never went into the panyards. I didn't go to a whole number of things where I would be exposed to this element, so to speak.
Yeah.
But when I went into the country, I fell in with the fellas on the street. The same fellas who I didn't recognize in Port of Spain, I would meet the same kind of people here. And I felt, as I say, they became my friends, and I lined with them and so on. And I began to know them.
Yes.
And so now I had a frame in which to put those people who I had known in Port of Spain, who I didn't know in Port of Spain. So later on I could go anywhere, actually, and speak to anybody because I had this grounding with people in the countryside. Does that do you follow?
No, it makes a lot of sense. But so when I think of now of the Dragon Can Dance, for instance, and the affection and love, really, that you show for Aldrich and his aspirations, his talent, and so on, and you also for the what can I say, the cultural commitment, without knowing it as that people had on the hill for Carnival and the things associated with Carnival, and the sense that they have of life. I mean, I think that whatever your initial impression about urban Trinidad and Tobago, and I mean, I think we're talking frankly here about black people in the urban setting in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that your sensibility shifted. You started to contextualize them and appreciate what it has moved them, no? Am I correct?
Right, yes.
Because, I mean, a person who did not empathize with the urban experience on the hill couldn't write Dragon Can Dance.
Right. Right, yes.
No, we're talking about how you had that shift in sensibility to appreciate the urban characters in context, you know?
Right, and I think it was very useful, and I mean, I feel that so many of people have been robbed of that experience. They're robbed of ever knowing the people that they're talking about or living with. And I think that I was very fortunate to have fell in with these guys. And later on in life, wherever I went, you know, I dealt with the ordinary people in the same fashion.
Yes.
You know, they were people that I knew, people I respected, people I valued, you know, despite their economic status.
Yes.
So I think that was very useful. And that leads me to feel that we need to find some ways of putting people into contact with even people of their own age groups, but who of a different class, if you want.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, well, I mean, certainly, I mean, if we could just pursue the matter on Dragon dragon can't dance. It's not only that you have love and affection for those people who live on the hill, and you have an appreciation and a respect for the value of what they are doing. You also have the ability as well to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So with a character like Pariag, for instance, who comes from the countryside, New Lands, and comes into the urban setting as a kind of stranger, you are able to put yourself in his shoes and basically show the gap that has to be breached, that has to be bridged, and also what it takes in humanity from each person living in his or her own shoes to really reach over and embrace the other person. I mean, Earl, I really am moved by some of the writing that you've done, and right. I think it is important for people to know what you have written and to read what you have written, to have a sense of not just the mind at work or the creativity at work, but the consciousness, because that book is a all-embracing of humanity kind of book. And it's very important because it's set right here in Trinidad and dealing with all the problems we have here, you know.
Right.
So
well, thank you.
You want to say anything about that? Listening as well, and who will read your books. The other thing I wanted to, you talk about the gang violence. At that time, you lived the era of what you call it? It was the era of marabuntas and renegades, right? Right. You lived the era of marabuntas and renegades. So explain to people, what was that? Are we talking here about the early 50s?
I would think so. That would be, yes, around the time of the early 60s, yes.
Right. Okay. So explain to people what marabuntas and renegades meant in East Port of Spain at that time.
Well, when I look at it now, I mean, the truth is that, as I said, I didn't quite know them. I knew what people said about them. I didn't know them at first hand. When I went into the countryside, as I say again, I met the countryside version of the same people. But they were not, well, they were concerned in a kind of way, but the violence was on a lower level than the level in Port of Spain. Right. So that is the story. That in the case of one was a violence that I heard about, marabuntas. But there's an interesting story to be told.
Go ahead.
We lived for a while on Lavendale Road, the road going up the hill. And to tell you, and not very far from Desperado's Panyard.
Yes.
Desperado's Panyard was a little further up the hill. But I didn't even know. Sometimes I would hear the music, but I never went beyond the house I lived in.
Right.
And that is, I think, the plight or the situation of many people from an aspiring middle class. They belong to the same group of people, but their aspirations probably were a little clearer in terms of what they wanted to be, and the possibilities a little more credible, more that the possibilities, they could realize these possibilities.
Yeah, the possibilities were more in grasp.
The possibilities of social climbing or social, of really not, of a better life.
Yes.
let's say, of a better life. And that tells you how alienated, if you want, a lot of us grew up with in relation to the people in Port of Spain, to the lower classes in Port of Spain, although we ourselves belonged in some kind of way to these classes.
All right.
And I mean, and this puts you, this causes me then to ask a lot of questions of the society and of its leadership in terms of what have you done for these people to help them to be able to move forward.
Yeah. Well, that is one of the big political questions in our society, isn't it?
Sorry?
I said that is one of the big political questions in our society.
Right.
You know, and a lot of these gangs also, in fact, became steel bands, right? I mean, Renegades became a steel band eventually sponsored. Marabuntas morph into
Marabuntas were young desperados.
Young desperados. They morphed into desperados, the band. So steel band became the means in which violence and violent confrontation was translated into something creative.
But that is the aspect of them that we were focused on, or we were asked to focus on. But the steel band was much, much more.
Yes.
And it's very unfortunate that we didn't have people, well, there were a few people in the society to be advocates for them and to help you to, not only to understand them, to understand what? What did we want to understand? Why they should rebel in those circumstances?
Yeah.
No, we couldn't be asking such a question. We have to do more than that. You know.
Yeah. Something to the world, and we miss it.
Right. Yes. I mean, we have not done very well with a number of these things. It's almost like if we had a group of people who wanted their own survival was what was important.
Yes.
And they didn't see the things that it was never celebrated in that fashion against.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm saying that the people who were involved in this play, because that was the point I wanted to make.
Yes.
With whom I played football and so on. It was the same ordinary people around in Rio Claro.
Yes, of course. Of
and
course.
later on in Matura, where I went to live much later, we went up in Best Village, right? With a play that I had written as well. But it involved the whole village.
Yes.
What I'm pleased to say that there are many things that we have done that have had the potential to really bring the community together.
Okay.
You know, and to help people to develop themselves. I always regret that I left because there are a couple of people there who I felt I would really have loved to help to push these people forward to their own full potential.
With talent, yes, and potential.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think one of the reasons that things turned out the way they have become, is because to the political elite, these people became supporters and the herd of followers, rather than to use political power to support them to self-empowerment. And I think
hearing you clearly, huh? Bhoe?
I was saying that part of the reason for what has happened is that the political elite of our society use people like that as part of the herd of followers or as part of a group of supporters, rather than to use the power they had in order to empower these people and help them to help themselves so that they can grow and develop. And I think that has been the big independence mistake, quite frankly.
Right. But I think that we have to take it back a little further. I think sometimes we feel that, We can simply look at independence and say we have done this and we have done that. But a lot of things stem from actions taken before independence.
Yes. Go ahead, elaborate on that.
Yes, what we might call emancipation. What was emancipation? What I'm saying here, or what I want to say, is that we have utilized or used certain activities that have been here, like emancipation and things like that, as really things that benefited black people. When indeed what it did was consolidate an inferiority, right? Even with the supposed emancipation. And I think that one of our problems, if you want, is that we have not looked back, all of us, at what has taken place in the society and to register what we feel about them and how we can repair them, how we can do things to benefit the society as a whole.
Yeah. Look at what they are trying to say and capture. So thank you very much for listening to me.
And thank you both for inviting me and for provoking some of this discussion, to make it hopefully what it is.
Yes, well, we all need to interact with each other. That is how we get our best, you know that. Writing is a lonely profession. You have to do that by yourself. But the intellect requires, engagement.
Right.
And that is what we try to do here. So thank you very, very much. This is Brighter Morning with Bhoe on MCTV and U97.5, and I am Bhoe Tiwari. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.